Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm your host, E-Train. I'm a 13-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host, booktuber, and I am just so excited for today's interview. I am back, that's right, back, with the one and only guest today. Who do you think it is? Who is it? Well, here's a little bit about her. She is the author of the amazing stories Aftermath and The Color of Sound. They're meaningful, they're heartwarming, heartbreaking at the same time, and I just love them with all my heart. So I'm talking with Emily Barth Isler, and this is her second time on, and I'm so happy you took time out of your day to join me, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thanks for having me back for the second time. I'm overjoyed to be here and love talking with you.
Yeah, and I'm overjoyed that you're here as well. So for those who don't know, The Color of Sound recently came out, and I had the chance to read an advanced reader's copy of it, and it's just it was so impactful, really kind of changed my heart in ways that I didn't really know it could be changed. It pulled on my heartstrings, and the complex themes, everything about it just made it incredible. But I don't want to spoil too much because I'm sure after this interview, you're all gonna buy yourself a copy, right? So, my first question for you, Emily, is just a little bit about the main character. So, Rosie is considered a prodigy violin player, but she also has the unique gift of being able to see music and sounds in color. I'd never heard of anything like this before reading Rosie's story. In fact, I thought it was fictional until I did a little bit of research and discovered that there are people who can actually see sounds in color. It's called synesthesia. So, how did the idea to give Rosie this unique gift come about?
Well, it's so interesting that you had that experience where, at first you wondered if it was fictional. This is something that my editor, Amy Fitzgerald, and I talked about a little bit when I was working on the book because synesthesia is very real. I have synesthesia, not exactly like Rosie has. Which we can talk about. I have a slightly different version that more is about numbers, letters, words, days of the week, months of the year, time sort of stuff, as opposed to music and color. But one of the interesting things about synesthesia is that I think it also works so beautifully as a metaphor, and it works really well for Rosie. So whether the readers know about synesthesia or not, I think they can have a meaningful experience either way. And then, of course, if they get to the end and read the reader's note before doing any research, they'll discover that it is real and that it's something I have experience with. But what I really like about it is it kind of lets the reader have the experience that they need to have as the book goes on. And one thing that made me want to write about this is that having synesthesia is obviously an experience that I had long before I understood what it was or that it was a thing, as opposed to just my own perspective. And that is exactly why I wanted to write about it, because whether or not any of us has synesthesia, we all have our own unique ways of experiencing the world based on the ways our brain works, the experiences we've had, the people we've encountered, the things that we've, taken in and processed in various ways or not processed. And so in a way, I hope the book works on many levels in that we could all be sitting in the same room, let's say watching the same play or movie, and we might all be experiencing it slightly differently. In fact, chances are good we're all experiencing it a little bit differently. And same thing with life. You never know what the people around you are getting out of an experience or how they see things. For all I know, you're wearing a beautiful red shirt, but it's possible that the way you see red is different from the way I see red. It might be the way that you experience blue, or, there are things that we never can know because we can't get inside other people's brains. And that in itself is such a great metaphor for building empathy, because we never know what another person is feeling or how they're experiencing something. So, the basic seed of it is that I have synesthesia and I wanted to write about it, but it to me also really beautifully covers so much more about the human experience and really about empathy.
Yeah. My next question for you is, well, we talked a little bit about it. So throughout the story, we're swept into Rosie's emotional struggles of being kind of boxed into her identity as a prodigy violinist. And she's kind of like screaming inside of her. She wants to be more than just her talent. She wants to be seen for more than just her talent. especially when it comes to her mom. I'm really glad that you didn't sugarcoat her emotions, especially when she went through a violin strike where she did not play the violin for a long time. And you captured the sort of clash between Rosie and her mom really well. And I just feel so much empathy for Rosie. Like we just talked about empathy. And how did you capture this emotional relationship, this roller coaster so well?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm glad that that it worked for you. And I, gosh, I mean, it's not my story. It's not autobiographical, but I definitely pulled things from my own life, things I've observed, things I have felt. And then the beautiful thing about fiction is you can place them in an environment where they're really heightened and, kind of raise the stakes. I had a little bit of Rosie's experience myself as a kid. I started acting professionally when I was 5 years old. And
Wow.
I really enjoyed it throughout my childhood, but I remember the feeling of realizing somewhere around Rosie's age, 12, 13, that I never really chose this hobby, this talent that I had. And for me, it was, I was acting and singing professionally and, was really ensconced in the world of musicals, musical theater, choir, opera, things like that. Um, and I did love it, but I was so young when I started doing it. It wasn't something I understood with any context. So I really related to Rosie in terms of the idea of when you are a gifted child or a passionate kid about something, you get to a certain point where you're like, huh, how did this start? And when did I like, do I want to keep doing this?
Yeah.
And Rosie just doesn't really have the advantage at the beginning of the book of having parents who understand that and who are willing to kind of talk it through with her. I did have that. Luckily, my parents are very different from Rosie's parents, but also through doing professional theater as a child, I met a lot of kids who had parents who were much more
Mm.
intensely involved with their career and much more sort of wrapped up in how it went. And so observing that always made me keenly aware of that dynamic. And then, part of wanting to write this was the balance of becoming a parent myself. And my kids are tweens now, they're middle grade readers. And so they're at an age where I'm watching them experience things that I experienced as a child that I still so vividly remember, that were so formative. And it those memories are so close to the surface for me, but also I see them now through another perspective as a parent, and it's really beautiful to get the opportunity to revisit some of those feelings with a different perspective. So I wrote it with empathy towards Rosie, but I also have a great deal of empathy towards her mom, and I have empathy towards her grandmother. And, not that I would make any of the same choices as them, not that my kids are anything like Rosie, but it's just so interesting to be in, what a lot of people call the sandwich right now, where I am a daughter and I have a daughter. I've got, thank goodness, both generations alive and well and interacting. And I was so glad for the opportunity to get to write about that.
I love that. Yeah. And like you said about just not really knowing like what like kind of knowing when everything started. I guess you could say that like about reading. Like maybe for me, just like people always say or ask me like when did you start reading and why did you start reading? But I don't know. I mean, I've always loved reading. I don't know when I didn't. So it can be like
Exactly.
yeah.
These things become part of our identities and our experiences before we really have concrete memories. And, the hope is that they all become positive parts of our lives. But in Rosie's case, when she sort of reaches this place where she's starting to question it, part
Yeah.
of that questioning is wondering like what do I want from this and what do I want going forward. And I really hope that readers can relate to that journey, even if they're not violin players or prodigies or have synesthesia or any of these
Yeah.
things. I think everyone can relate to that point in, I'd say, probably adolescence, although I'm sure there's a range for people. We all reach points in our lives where we have periods of evaluation where we say, okay, I've been doing this thing for a while. Do I still want to do it? And it can be, an activity like the violin or a sport or something, or it could just be like any facet of our personality or our lives or the way that we choose to do things. And I think it's interesting to talk about those moments of choice. And there's nothing wrong with reflecting and saying, yeah, like I'm happy with the way this activity is going and I'm going to continue to do it. But in Rosie's case, she needed to stop so that she could evaluate and really figure out what it meant to her and how she wanted music to be in her life going forward.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, I mean, I talk about this a lot, just your story really there were so many facets of it that really surprised me. And I mean, in realistic fiction, you're not always on the edge of your seat. I mean, I'm definitely drawn to realistic fiction, but it's not something that kind of leaps out at you like, "I had no idea this was going to happen." But that's exactly what I felt with The Color of Sound. And you also included some historical references, as well as Jewish themes in The Color of Sound. So Rosie's grandmother's backstory, which I'm not going to spoil, but just Rosie's family history in general is deeply moving, and I didn't see any of it coming. So I guess this all kind of ties back to what is your writing process like with The Color of Sound? And did you in the way readers kind of were surprised by certain aspects of the book, did you surprise yourself in the writing?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked this question because 100% yes, it surprised me as it unfolded,
Mm,
which to me is the fun part of writing. Like there's parts of it we can control as writers and storytellers. And then I like to think of writing sort of like improv, which is funny because there's also an improv acting troupe storyline in the book. And I really relate to the yes and part of improv that, for
oh, yeah.
anybody watching who has never taken an improv class or read about improv, the whole idea behind it is that when a suggestion is made or a new idea is introduced, you have to accept it and then move on and with it and continue. And so I think writing is a lot like improvising. Obviously, you get to go back or you have to go back and revise and make it make sense and make it cohesive. But a lot of times, the improvisational nature of writing really surprises me. And I always say to myself, okay, let's try this. Let's see where it goes. You can always go back. So I write with a very yes and attitude, which means sometimes my subconscious surprises me with a thought and I go with it and see where it leads. But with this book, um, actually with all of my books, and I always like to say I've written, I think, 11 at this point, and I've sold 4 of the books. 2 are out and 2 are coming out. And I think that's really important always to mention because writing, even once you're doing it professionally, is full of rejections and things that you may work on that never see the light of day, and that's okay. I like to think of myself like a baseball player. I if you're batting above 300, that's an amazing batting average. And as a writer, I'm trying to just bat 300, but that means that there's a lot of pieces that don't work out. But
Right.
that's kind of an aside. I always like to outline before I start writing. And, there's sort of this debate among writers, as I know you know, because you've talked about it with other writers. There's like, pantsing, like going by the seat of your pants,
Yeah.
or plotting. And I always start out plotting. I plot really carefully and pretty tightly, but without fail, I end up tossing my outline about halfway through. I still need the experience of writing the whole thing because I thought, oh, this is, if I'm going to throw it away, why don't I just outline half of it? But my outline is kind of my first draft and maybe even sometimes my second draft. And then by the time I get to writing it, I inevitably veer from the path because I'm yes anding. And that's the part of writing that I really love because I didn't see half of this stuff coming. And some of it was really introduced by things going on in my life. Like I knew Rosie was going to be Jewish and I knew that her Jewish identity was part of this story, but I didn't realize what a huge part of the story it was going to be. And as I was working on this book, the summer of 2022 was when I wrote the bulk of the first draft. Um, a distant relative that we didn't know about reached out to my sister through an ancestry
Mm.
website and said, I think I'm your, second cousin. I think our grandmothers were cousins. And I mean, we had no idea this person had lived. Our family was splintered because of the Holocaust, went in a million different directions. We presumed that most of our relatives, aside from two, had died. And discovering that there was this other, sister of my great grandmother who had lived, and um, made me want to write about that experience of discovery, that even when you think you know your family, and again, sort of like the synesthesia stuff, I hope it works on multiple levels so that even if readers don't have a family history they don't know about or that comes to light, the idea that there's always room for discovery and that there's so much that we don't know, and that can be an exciting thing. There are facets of us yet to discover, no matter where we are in life. So a lot of things happening in real life, influenced my writing process. Another was swimming. I had started lap swimming a couple months before I wrote the book, and honestly did not originally intend to include anything about the pool on Lucy's. Lucy is my aftermath character. We can edit that out. I honestly did not intend to include anything about swimming or the pool on Rosie's grandparents' property, but as I started swimming myself and found it to be amazing for my own synesthesia and my own obsessive compulsive disorder, to like unlocking creativity. And I wrote most of this book while I was swimming and found myself coming up with ideas. I couldn't help but work it into the story. And then all of a sudden it became a pivotal part of the story. And I mean, that's that yes and improv
Yeah.
style. And it's so exciting. And I feel very grateful that I had the time and space to sort of figure out, because I had sold this book before I wrote it. I'd written the first three chapters and the outline and sold it to my editor, Amy, based on that. And Amy was generous enough to give me space to say, hey, I'm going to go in a completely different direction. Is that okay? And she said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it's fun to see where the story takes you. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer. And my next question for you is like continuing with the Jewish identity. So, did Rosie's connections to Judaism were kind of a story of secrets being revealed, like slowly and slowly, but then progressively more. So, I just felt my own connection to Judaism really deepen the more I dove into the story or dived. I don't know which one's which. So was this something that you purposely tried to craft into the story, just Rosie and like the reader kind of connecting on this foundation?
I mean, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that feedback so much, and it means so much to me. But no, I, really started out thinking that her Judaism was going to be evident and apparent. I think any book that I write is inherently a Jewish a Jew
Right.
okay. I think any book that I write is inherently a Jewish book because I'm a Jewish person. And
Mhm.
so I can't help but bring some of myself to the table. Unless I'm writing, high fantasy or something like that. But even
Yeah.
then, so much of my idea about the way the world works and morals and values and things like that are informed by my Judaism. So
Okay.
I knew that any book I wrote was going to have some Jewish themes and some mention of Judaism. Aftermath definitely has a few mentions of the fact that Lucy's family is Jewish, but it doesn't really center around that. And I think that kind of representation is really important too. Like the incidental Judaism, I want people to pick up books and have it not be about a Jewish character, but the reader's like, oh, okay, I guess, yeah, that person's Jewish. It's very normalizing in the way that when I was growing up, 30 years ago, every book was sort of default assumed Christian because that was what we were exposed to, unless it was very obviously about something else. And so having that default assumption taken away and exposing readers to just very inadvertent mentions of diversity is really
Yeah.
important too. But so, I knew Rosie was Jewish, and I didn't think it was going to be a huge part of this. I honestly, I don't want to give away spoilers, but um, a lot of the parts of her grandmother's history, I did not plan to include in the story, and they just popped into my mind, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is even more meaningful than I realized. And so, yes, it did really deepen my appreciation for my own heritage and for my knowledge about it growing up too, for the stories that my parents made sure we knew, for the traditions that I was allowed to keep. And that I was encouraged to love. It made me feel really grateful. And when I was writing it, it's funny. When I was writing the book, I thought we were kind of at an extreme level of anti-Semitism in the United States. And of
Yeah.
course, since then, unfortunately, it has gotten even more extreme and more devastating. And so I'm really grateful in hindsight that this book is so overtly Jewish and Jewish themed, because I think the only way to combat that overwhelming anti-Semitism is to keep telling our stories and to keep encouraging people to be kind and empathetic to one another. And I'm sorry that it's so necessary, but glad that the book hopefully can help some people in this moment of really intense despair.
Yeah, it helped me. I know it'll help other readers. And like you said, it's just during these times of anti-Semitism, it's so important to highlight the good in Judaism, the beauty of it. And that's what you definitely did through The Color of Sound.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me. And also, it was exciting to write a character who was choosing her Judaism. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but in the same way that she was questioning her violin career, and did she want, she never got to choose it at the beginning. Did she want to choose it again at this juncture of change? She also got a chance to sort of say, okay, I was born into this Jewish faith, but I don't really know what it means. Do I want to choose to explore it and to feel it and to deepen it? And so I really wanted to illustrate the idea of her choosing it, like no one was forcing her to identify with her religion. She sort of found her own way there in the way that she didn't get to choose with the violin. And there's so many overlapping themes, I feel like, between synesthesia or neurodiversity and religion, in this case Judaism, that really surprised me, of sort of the idea of what we are born with, nature versus nurture. What do we accept, and what do we choose to focus on? What do we choose to reveal? How do we stand out? How do we blend in? All of these things that really paired very well together.
Yeah. And my next question for you is it's back to your first novel, which I have right here, Aftermath. So Aftermath, well, as I said earlier, it's a beautiful book, really tackled topics that I haven't really seen very much in middle grade, and I really like your usage of little quotes in the beginning of each chapter. Let me just find one real quick. So, chapter 2. A square is a regular quadrilateral, which means that it has 4 equal sides and 4 equal angles. What happens when one side is gone? Is it still a square? No. If a family has 4 members and one is gone, are we still a family? Right there. Um,
That's
so
one of my favorite ones. I love that you picked that one.
Yeah, so just that quote or that lesson, that message right there, is just so powerful, and you had that in nearly every single chapter of the book. So, from a writing standpoint, how did that idea kind of come to life?
It's funny, I've seen it in some other books, and I think I must have just really enjoyed it. Mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery. I've seen other authors do it, and I really appreciated it. I like it as sort of it's almost a palate cleanser, but also a little spoiler, because each of those little math problem quotes are also a little bit about what that chapter is going to be about. And the same thing in The Color of Sound, there's little music
Yeah.
definitions. I knew I needed to include music definitions in The Color of Sound because there's a lot of vocabulary that the general reader is not going to be familiar with, and I didn't want to leave readers hanging like, what are all of these words? So yeah, so I did that with both of these books, where the beginning of the chapter has a little bonus information that is connected to the story but a little bit separate from it. And I just really enjoyed that again in as a reader in other books, and I've done it with these two books. And I have another book I'm working on now about an aspiring sports journalist, sports writer, and beginning of every chapter has a little clipping from a newspaper article that other people have written that she's reading, and then the last one is her first byline. So it sort of charts her evolution towards her dream of becoming a sports writer. So yeah, I guess I like that. And I guess I don't know if it's gonna be my thing always, or if it's just, when it serves the story, obviously. But
Yeah.
I think of it as like a little extra bonus. And I hope that, it's useful and to readers, and that it doesn't, you have to be careful it doesn't take people out of the story too much.
Mhm.
But I also think with both of these books, and particularly with Aftermath, which is an intense story, it gives the reader a little chance to take themselves out and breathe for a second and
Mhm.
come back to the story. So I think it serves a couple purposes, hopefully.
So my next question for you is, it's also a congratulations!
Oh,
So
thank
in
you.
preparing for today's talk, I discovered that you have not just another project in the works, but it actually has sold, and it's a picture book. We love picture books here. I think picture books are for all ages. If
I think
anyone
so
says that they
too.
aren't, if
Oh
anyone
yeah,
says
no,
they aren't, then like no,
they're for everybody,
they
for
are.
sure.
So your
Yes.
picture book is called Always Enough Love, which Nancy Paulson Books signed on. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I love Nancy. She's the best, and you're the best as well. So it's a
Oh,
perfect
thank you.
combination.
Nancy's amazing.
She is. And so I'm just really curious, can you share a bit about the story?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just have to say I'd always known Nancy's name because I remember reading Joan Bauer's books when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and seeing that Nancy was the editor. And before I even really knew what an editor exactly did, like I knew the big concept, but I didn't work in publishing yet. I was aware of Nancy and knew that I liked her taste. She always had the best books.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember watching her interview with you, and you had her on the
Mhm.
on the
Yeah.
pod, and just, I mean, she's so brilliant and knowledgeable and thoughtful. And when we were getting ready to send, I actually have you to thank, because when we were getting ready to send this picture book out, I think the timing was such that you had just talked to Nancy and I had watched it, and I said to my agent, "Hey, can we send this to Nancy Paulson, because she's the dream editor." And I couldn't believe when, she wrote to us and said the story really connected with her, and did we want to work together? I mean, it's so dreamy. I still can't get over it, how amazing it is, and feel so lucky. But a little backstory is that I found an email I sent to myself in 2009 with the
Wow.
very first draft of the concept that eventually became the book that will be Always Enough Love, which is such a great reminder to people of how long this process can be. Not just the publishing part of it, which we know is long, but also the creative part of it. And sometimes, I mean, I remember thinking in 2009 that, like, oh, I have this idea. Okay, cool. Like,
Yeah.
how great, we're done. And it's been through so many iterations. And sometimes that requires years and years of breathing. It's like that palate cleanser we were just talking about, but sometimes you need years for something to develop into the story it's meant to be. So for all you writers watching, like, yeah, it can take years. So that picture book is about a large blended family, and the idea of the youngest kid in the family, not always getting what they think they want, but always getting enough of what they need. So in a large family there may not be enough of the material things, or time, space, all of those things that are limited, but the one thing that there is, hopefully in the best case, an abundance of, is love amongst the family. And so this is kind of an ode to large families of all kinds, families of choice, families
Mhm.
of birth, whatever your idea of family is, the idea that there should be an abundance of love.
I love that. I need to read that. That'll be a perfect read aloud. I love that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share it with you. It's with the illustrator now. So again, that's another part of the process that like you have to let breathe. You can't rush it. It takes time. And Laura Ramos is the illustrator that Nancy signed on, and her work is gorgeous. And I can't wait to see what she adds to the story because, as you know, with the picture book, the words are just a tiny piece of it, and it's so exciting. I haven't seen the illustrations yet, and I cannot wait to see what Laura is going to bring to the story, and I'm sure it will change and evolve given her input because it's equally hers now.
Well, I'm excited too, and authors out there, now you know. Watch E Train Talks, and then you'll get to get the editor of your dreams. Maybe.
Exactly. You never
Yeah,
know what it'll inspire. I mean, I really owe you because like I said, I admired Nancy for years and like had always heard her name and watched, seen her books and all this stuff, but it was her conversation with you where I thought like, oh, maybe, maybe that could happen, and it happened. It's crazy.
yeah, and all it takes is a little bit of faith, a little bit of love for both your story and for your dreams, and maybe something amazing will happen.
Yeah. It's all thanks to you.
Yeah. So, my next question for you is a question that I have never asked anybody before, but I feel this interview is perfect to ask it.
I'm
So, I
excited.
have I have my little music note bow tie on. Um
Oh, you do. I love that.
so but this question is one that I'm really excited to ask. So, because the color of sound is just so musically like intertwined with music, intertwined with song, I'm really curious if you could choose one song that best represents your story, which would it be and why?
I mean, this is the hardest question because there are so many beautiful songs. But there is a song that I listened to a ton while I was writing The Color of Sound. And I've used it since in the few school visits I've done so far for the book. At the time we're filming this, the book has been out, I think, like 3 weeks. So I've only done like a couple of school visits, but and some writing workshops. But this is the song that I use and ask students to sort of imagine that they have synesthesia and listen to this song with that lens and write about that. And the song is it's a song called Salut d'amour, which means like salute of love. And there's a version of it played by Sarah Chang, who is just one of the premier violin players of our time. She is just phenomenal, and it's violin and piano. And it's about a 3-minute song. And every time I listen to it, I get different things from it. And it feels to me like it's one movement. It's not like it has different themes or chapters, but within the one song, it feels like it conveys so many different stories to me. And that's what I hope The Color of Sound does. It's one cohesive narrative, but obviously there's all these elements to it. And so as I was writing it and listening to this song on repeat, which is something I do a lot when I really am enjoying a particular song, I tend to just listen to it over and over and over and over, whether it's classical music or any other style of music. And it's something that I always, to come back to the synesthesia, I always thought that was just this weird thing that I did. And it turns out that's a pretty typical hallmark for a lot of neurodivergent people who enjoy listening to things on repeat because you might get new things from it every time, which is an interesting discovery every time. So this song just really spoke to me, and I think it's really beautiful, but it's a little bit sad, but it's hopeful, and it's happy, but it has all of these different elements to it, and really speaks to me.
So now, I mean, I'm sad about this, but I'm also excited. So it's the final question of the interview. Sad because the interview is coming to an end, but I'm excited to hear what your answer to it is. So I actually asked this question to you last time in our last interview, and the question is, if you could be or meet any literary character, whether an author or a book character of your choice, who would it be and why? And I'm curious to see if your answer differs from last time.
I know. I purposefully didn't look at my answer from last time because I wanted to be authentic and objective. Um, so this is another one of those things where there are so many different ways I could answer, and each one of them I think would be fairly authentic and real. I think this time I'm going to say Anne Shirley in Anne of Green Gables because she
Very
was
cool.
such a big part of my childhood. Like, I those books shaped so much of the visual, like, inner life of my brain, because
Yeah.
my parents would take turns reading the whole Anne of Green Gables series out loud to me and my sister when we took car trips. And we used to take a lot of car trips. We'd spend 10, 12 hours in the car. And so we would go through those books and then sometimes reread them again. Like I love to reread, re-listen. I
Mhm.
pick up so much more. And I think I taught myself some of how to write by rereading the books that I loved or re-listening to them. And Anne of Green Gables is so unique in that I don't know, like there's some objectively bad and hard things that happen, but there's something so hopeful about it. And Anne is an optimist without being a toxic positivity person, which like that term wasn't around when Ella Montgomery was writing the book, um but there's something so hopeful about Anne that I hope I can imbue in my stories too, in that even when she faces hardship, she finds a way to give meaning to life, not just for herself, but people around her. And she's just so authentically herself, oftentimes to her own detriment. Like, you
Yeah.
know, she really could probably be a little bit more polite sometimes, and especially in the beginning when she's more rough around the edges. But I love
Mhm.
that. I love that about her. And I love that the series allows us to watch her grow up and become a mother herself and have a career as a writer. I mean, obviously that was very like inspiring to me. So, it would be really cool to hang out with her for a day.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And so your answer from last time was every book that you'd ever read. So you'd wanna meet every character from every
Oh
book.
my gosh. Wow.
So you
That's a
kinda really
really
narrowed it down this time.
wow. You know what? I was thinking for some reason I thought I probably chose Jonah from The Giver because that's my all-time favorite book, The Giver
Oh,
by Lois Lowry. So I didn't pick that this time because I assumed that 2 or 3 years ago me said that. So, there's a bonus answer, and I'll think of another one for the next time we talk. When Always Enough Love comes out, I'll have another answer.
yeah. I'm excited to see what it will be. And
Thanks.
so everybody, let's give a round of applause for Emily.
Oh,
Woo!
thank you so much. I love hearing your thoughts on books, and, I'm so grateful to you for spreading the love of literacy far and wide. It's such a gift. You're a gift, and you're sharing your gift, and
Yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you. Yeah, thank you for sharing your stories with the world. They warm our hearts, they break our hearts at the same time, and they just mold them back together. And everybody, you can follow Emily on social media, and her website is www.emilybarthisler.com. And that's all the time that we have for today. But I know all of you are going to adore, absolutely love, and cherish The Color of Sound. And if you've not yet read Aftermath, then you're going to love it as well. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And stay safe, keep on reading, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.
Thank you.